tried to define what social ecology is by distinguishing it from environmentalism, and by pointing out that in contrast to many other ecologies, including even human ecology, our emphasis has been an attempt to see our ecological problems, indeed our very place in nature from a social standpoint, which is not normally the case in most discussions, even of human ecology. And very significantly, what we've tried to do is, one, establish a philosophical approach, a way of reasoning that is not strictly deductive, but is eductive, premised on a dialectic which, while greatly influenced by the whole dialectical tradition and philosophy, that is to say, a way of reasoning, of thinking developmentally, rather than thinking in a sort of syllogistic, analytic, and deductive way, we've tried to develop a philosophy that would be able to interpret many of the problems produced by humanity's dislocation in nature. And we've tried to show that humanity, a product of nature, indeed a product of nature of this very special kind, that is capable of intervening in nature consciously, hence the enormous need, by the way, for a mode of reasoning, dialectical reasoning that is ecological, that this humanity undergoes a development from first nature into second nature, notably social and cultural, but that development is not a complete development by any means. Having emerged out of first nature, am I being clear? Into a second nature, which we call culture and society, and absorbing first nature with it, because we always reproduce our culture in an ecological and biological way, beginning with child care. We function as mammals in this respect, always in a cultural or social context. We have long dependent children who begin to develop associations, need the care, need the attention, and finally develop the affections or feelings that lead to social bonding, begin to create institutions out of that to produce society, and we produce a second nature. Now all of this merges out of first nature, absorbs first nature, or what we would call basic, primal, biological nature, into second nature, such that there isn't any part of the world today that isn't affected by second nature. There is no wilderness that is free from airplanes flying overhead. There is no wilderness that cannot almost rapidly be destroyed by lumber barons, by industrialists, and mainly by capitalists. Today, it's a joke and a farce to talk about going back to the Pleistocene. It just totally is ridiculous. It has no meaning, however attractive it may be to very romantic and very immature and intellectually immature people, in my view. Second nature is here to stay. Humanity is here to stay. When humanity goes, the whole world will go. One of the myths that Lynn Margulis, who wrote the book Microcosmos, created is that if all of life were extinguished except for anaerobic bacteria, life would resume evolution again. That position is totally absurd, for many reasons that I can't go into unless you want to raise questions. So we're here to stay, and we're products of nature, no less than rabbits, bunny rabbits, pussycats, or tough and manly grizzly bears. The real problem that we're faced with now is how does second nature unfold? That is a new evolution, which integrates the old evolution into itself. How does that second nature unfold? And we have found that development of second nature has been warped. It's been distorted. It's been distorted by the emergence of hierarchy, classes, the state, and that we have to transcend both not only first nature and second nature. By transcending, I don't mean abandoning it, I mean going beyond it and absorbing what is best in it into a free nature. That third phase, if you like, the dialectical negation of negation, if you like. in which we will finally reconcile ourselves with each other in a harmonious social order, that at the same time will reconcile us with nature, because the very notion of dominating nature, and it's never more than a notion, has entailed the domination of human by human. It has not begun with women, it began with age groups. It's not wrong to say that one of the primary forms of domination has been the domination of women by men. And very important has also been the domination of man by men. Men have been terribly victimized by their own systems of domination. Let's not kid ourselves about that. To be a man is a hard thing today in many ways. It's becoming as hard as to be a woman, either today or in the past. But that's a separate question. It certainly was a male-oriented kind of civilization that at once gave us terrifying things and that at once gave us absolutely splendid things. If human beings have done no more than compose the music of Bach and Beethoven, or wrote the literature of Dickens or Tolstoy, or developed the philosophies of an Aristotle and a Hegel, that would be tremendous testimony which does not justify the terrible things that have happened, but show the capacity of all human beings, male and female, to really reach tremendous summits. No snail can do that in a biocentric democracy or autocracy. And we went through the change and evolution out of organic society into hierarchical society, and finally into its most vicious form, capitalism. And we've tried to face the issue of capitalism very straightforwardly. Capitalism is the most subtle, the most acute, and the most dangerous form of hierarchical society, because as it unfolds, certainly into the 1980s, possibly 90s, and certainly even into the 70s, but especially after the Second World War, capitalism went from an economy into a society. It turned everybody against everybody, indirectly or directly. The buyer-seller relationship, which forms the very basic molecular nexus of the market, inverting all relationships such that to give is replaced by to accumulate. To cooperate is replaced by to compete. To limit is replaced by to expand indefinitely, growth for the sake of growth, would undermine not only the biosphere, but it undermines social life itself. Sociality. People view each other in one sense or another as competitors, thinking hierarchically on an order of 1 to 10. They evaluate everything around them in such a way that things are either inferior or superior, even though they may simply be complementary toward each other, as men and women should be complementary toward each other without giving up their identities as women or as men, and should actually form a much richly variegated whole. Now, we have not arrived at that free nature. We are less than human today. We have not fulfilled the potentiality to produce a second nature that would finally produce a free nature, in which human beings would intervene into all affairs, their own and those of the natural world, in a way that would be benign, in a way that would be creative. We could have enhanced, whether we will or we won't, I don't know, but we could have enhanced and made evolution, natural evolution, more conscious of itself. We could have richly variegated the planet, acting as agents in behalf of all forms of life. We could have given consciousness and voice to a nature that, while it has a tendency to move toward complexity, can be as destructive as almost anything human beings can inflict on each other. We cannot romanticize the natural world without deceiving ourselves totally. At the same time, nature taking its course can lead to glacial ice ages, asteroids crashing into the planet, in fact, the very destruction of the planet. There's no guarantee that the natural world, permitted to evolve on its own, would always be benign. It really is, in my view anyway, a very romantic view. to view the natural world in such a way that it's always right. It isn't always right. There's a great deal of suffering in the natural world, not simply as a result of human beings. No zebra likes what a lion does to it, for example. And we can go all the way through the food chain to say that not the cruelty, but the pain that exists in nature is real. And perhaps human beings could mitigate that in one way or another. And perhaps human beings could enrich the world, much of which itself is often very unfinished. Enrich it, make it more bountiful for a life, as well as for themselves. So the evolution of second nature into a free nature has not occurred. Quite to the contrary, the development of second nature has moved along very disastrous as well as very creative paths. And with capitalism, growth for the sake of growth, accumulation for its own sake, the need to compete rather than cooperate, we find ourselves now, if not at the last stage, I don't know what the last stage of capitalism is, Marxists and others have been predicting the last stage. The last stage was supposed to be at the end of the First World War. Well, pretty close to 70 years has gone by and we're still looking for the last stage. But there are very clearly limits to the development of any such society. Limits which don't mean that that society is going to become more restrained, but which may pull down all of society, and as I say, all of the biosphere. And these limits are ecological. It's now become apparent that anyone who calls himself or herself a radical and does not take the ecological problem into consideration is literally putting a blindfold around his or her eyes. The big problem is not only justice, economic and social justice, which is surely important, it's freedom. And freedom involves a revolutionary transformation of this society. If not along the lines that those of you who have seen what happened in Spain in 1936 to 39, not along those lines, and at least along some kind of lines in which a re-empowerment of people can occur, which an ecological politics can be developed, not at the expense of an ecological sensibility. We must have that, but also with the commitment to the idea that the changes must be fundamental. And we can't disguise the changes. More significantly, we can't disguise the problems by replacing the word capitalism with industrial society and saying that machinery is responsible for all of this, or that technology is responsible for all of this. Technology magnifies a problem, it doesn't create the problem. Not that there aren't technologies that can create problems. Nuclear energy, the chemical industry, and so on and so forth. But technology magnifies a problem that is there. You don't need a high technology to tear down the planet, by the way. The history of the American continent, particularly the United States, is a story in which a fairly crude technology virtually devastated a vast continental area of 1 million square miles, despoiling its original forest, wiping out its wildlife, ruining its soil with a relatively primitive technology. It's only now that things that took 50 years to recover are occurring in 1 year. But the problem was there. So what if we had 50 more years? And I think 50 more years would be valuable to have, doubtless. The point is that what technology has done is magnify the problem. It totally misleads people to make this a problem of population. The greatest rates of population growth are occurring in areas of the world which use the least amount of energy, have the least amount of food. And it is not they who are doing damage to their land, but the Euro-American sphere, and the Russian as well, coming into the third world where forests are despoiled, cultures are wiped out, people are packed into cities where they die prematurely, where horrible conditions exist. And yet, in that Euro-American and Soviet sphere, the population growth rates are approximating zero population, ZPG.